They thought they could control everything, the streets, the fences, even the land beneath my feet. At first, I ignored the petty letters and the endless fines, but then, the HOA crossed a line so bold, so reckless, it nearly destroyed everything I had worked for. Neighbors whispered, papers piled up, and I felt the walls closing in. I knew I had two choices: bow down, or fight back with something they never saw coming. What happens when the people meant to protect your community become your greatest enemy? When I first moved into the neighborhood, it felt like a dream. The streets were lined with trimmed hedges, children rode their bikes freely, and neighbors waved as they watered their lawns. My home wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, a place where I could finally settle, build memories, and feel secure. At first, I believed the HOA existed to protect this picture-perfect life, to keep everything peaceful and orderly. But almost immediately, I noticed the cracks beneath the surface. Notes tucked under my door about minor violations. Stray comments from board members reminding me that the community had standards to uphold. It seemed harmless, even laughable in the beginning. After all, how much trouble could a few rules really cause? Still, something about the way they watched, the way they whispered at meetings, felt off. It was as if every fresh coat of paint, every planted flower bed, was silently judged. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that one day, these petty rules would grow into something much darker, something that would test just how far I was willing to go to protect my home. At first, the letters seemed almost harmless. A warning about the height of my grass, a notice that my trash cans had been left visible for too long, and even a complaint about the color of my mailbox flag. I laughed it off, thinking it was nothing more than a few overzealous board members trying to feel important. But the warnings didn't stop. They multiplied. Each envelope carried a new demand, each fine slightly higher than the last, and the tone grew sharper with every piece of mail that landed in my box. What started as gentle reminders soon turned into threats. Pay this, or face legal action. Correct that, or be dragged before the board. They said it was about protecting property values, but to me, it felt like a campaign of control. Every time I stepped outside, I felt their eyes on me. Neighbors, who once smiled, now watched with suspicion, as if waiting to see me slip up. The HOA president in particular seemed obsessed. She'd stroll by my property with a clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect the neighborhood. But her gaze always lingered on my home a little too long. She took photos of my yard, sometimes even crouching near the driveway to capture some invisible violation. When I confronted her, she smiled, almost amused, and said, "We're just doing what's best for the community." Soon, the fines grew outrageous. Hundreds of dollars for a flower bed that didn't meet approved color schemes. Another bill for the position of my satellite dish, even though the same model was mounted on at least 3 other houses nearby. It was clear I wasn't being singled out by accident. I was being targeted. The pressure began to seep into every part of my life. I'd come home from work already exhausted, only to find another notice taped to my door. My weekends were spent fixing things I didn't believe were broken, repainting fences I'd painted the month before, and trimming hedges until my hands ached. But no matter what I did, the letters kept coming. It felt like a game I could never win. The board summoned me to explain my non-compliance. I walked into the clubhouse, heart pounding, only to find a long table of stern faces staring me down. The president sat in the middle, flanked by her loyal supporters, while a few silent neighbors sat in the back, watching. They read out a list of my offenses like I was on trial grass too long by 2 inches, fence paint not the exact shade approved, seasonal decorations left out too long. Every point was delivered with an air of superiority, as if they had caught me committing a crime. I tried to defend myself, to explain that their rules were inconsistent, that others were guilty of the same so-called violations. But they cut me off, dismissing my words like they meant nothing. In the end, they handed me a folder with a total fine amount so staggering it made my stomach churn. And if I didn't pay within 30 days, they said, they'd place a lien on my property. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about rules. This was about power. They wanted me to break, to submit, to bow down like so many others had. But a small part of me refused. One quiet afternoon, Sarah opened her mailbox to find a neatly folded envelope stamped with the HOA's logo. Inside was a formal letter warning her to remove the small, hand-painted sign in her yard or face daily fines. Her hands trembled as she read, a mix of anger and disbelief washing over her. To Sarah, this wasn't just a letter, it was an attack on her freedom, and she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. At the next HOA board meeting, Sarah walked into the crowded room, her shoulders squared and her voice steady. Mark, the HOA president, sat at the head of the long, polished table, surrounded by board members with stern faces. Neighbors filled the back rows, whispering as Sarah stood up to speak. Her words cut through the silence. She was tired of intimidation, tired of petty rules. Mark's jaw tightened, and the room felt like it was holding its breath. Mark leaned forward, his voice sharp and controlled, insisting the rules were for everyone's benefit. But Sarah didn't flinch. She reminded the board and her neighbors that the community was built on people, not power. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as her courage grew. For the first time, others started nodding, realizing they too had been afraid to speak up. The tension between Sarah and Mark was electric, two forces colliding in a battle over principle. In the weeks that followed, more residents joined Sarah, quietly sharing their frustrations. A petition formed, signatures piling up faster than the board expected. Mark watched his authority begin to crumble. The HOA could no longer ignore the voices rising from the community. What began as one woman's fight was transforming into a collective stand for fairness, and the balance of power was shifting right before their eyes. Finally, after months of pressure, the HOA voted to overturn the petty rule and end the fines. The yard sign that once sparked conflict now stood proudly as a symbol of resilience. Neighbors who once felt powerless walked with a new sense of unity, grateful for Sarah's bravery. And though the battle was won, the memory lingered, a reminder that sometimes the fight for fairness begins with just one voice, refusing to be silenced.